Welcome into episode number 136 of The Voice Behind the Voice. I'm Sean Aronson, the TV and radio broadcaster for the St. Paul Saints, an independent minor league baseball team in the Twin Cities. Well, I will have more news 2 weeks from now in terms of the Open, just because we are leaving for Las Vegas for the baseball winter meetings next Monday, or Sunday, I should say. I'm actually leaving Friday. So this week's episode and then next week's episode, I will have recorded the Opens before we go to Vegas. But I'll report back, 3 weeks from now, about what the trip to Vegas was like. I'll be there for 6 days, which is way too long, but I'll get into that after I get back. But for this week, some relatively big news for me, not necessarily for you, the listener, but big news on my front, and that is that my producer, J.W. Cox, last week told me that he was willing to spend another season with me with the St. Paul Saints. Every year at the end of the season, I always tell him the door is open. If you want to come back, I would love to have you back. And every year, he wants to take some time after the season's over just to kind of unwind and then talk to his family, his lovely wife, Emily, his daughter, Penny. And so you get to that point, right, in your life and with your family, that do you want to continue to spend so much time away, and especially during a baseball season. JW is kind of my part-time broadcast media relations assistant, more so on the broadcast side, but does a lot of different things for the Saints. And so we ask a lot from him during the baseball season. But last week he informed me that he will be back. It'll be his 6th season with the Saints, 1 in the old ballpark and the first 4 in the new ballpark. And I can't tell you what it means to me on a lot of different levels. Number one, just having a friend that you've gotten to know over the last 5 years that you will work alongside of. And you just, especially on the broadcast, he does 25 home games with me. You sort of, after a while, develop a rapport. You know what the other person's going to say. You know how their mannerisms are, how they act, and it's just a lot easier to go on a broadcast with someone that you know so well. But number two, someone that knows the ins and outs of the Saints as much as he does from the past 5 years makes my job a lot easier. So excited that JW will be back. On a separate but equal note, I have now narrowed down my full-time broadcast media relations assistant to my finalists, of which I will be interviewing this week as well as next week in Las Vegas. So I will have that person in place, hopefully, before the Christmas holidays. And that's usually, I like to get it done before the first of the year. It doesn't always happen that way, but that's where I'm at in my process. So, but the bigger news, JW will be back and excited to have him. And again, I think he would have continued on the podcast being the producer, even if he hadn't come back on the Saints side of things. But it's always good to have someone that you know back in the booth with you. With that said, let's get to episode number 136. It is David Locke of the Utah Jazz. Really interesting guy. We sat down at the hotel that the team stays at, as I do for most of these, fortunately, just as the Jazz got into town. And we sat down kind of in a bar area at the hotel that most of the teams stay at, that I'm pretty familiar with. And right off the bat, we talk about him having auditory dyslexia and how that has been handled by him in life and through his broadcasting career. And it was interesting because this is something that had only become public about a month prior to us sitting down. So it was relatively new information. And I was very interested in it, and we talked a little bit about that off the bat, as well as a number of other things. If you have not subscribed to the podcast, you can do so on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to rate it. First night of Hanukkah was last night, as I record this on Monday the 3rd. So if you want to get me a Hanukkah present, as I said last week, rate the podcast. 5 stars would be great. You can follow us on social media, on Twitter, @TheVoiceBTV, Facebook, facebook.com/TheVoiceBTV, and you can always email me, thevoicebtv@gmail.com. All right, let's get to it. Episode number 136 with David Locke of the Utah Jazz. JW, glad to have you back. Now, roll the open.
I just disclosed it for the first time about a month ago, so I had never said anything. It wasn't that I was hiding it. Quite frankly, Shauna Lake, who's a good friend of mine, did a Channel 2 interview with me, and there was nothing really interesting about me, and so I tried to figure out what she was possibly going to do in this, and she's a good friend of mine, and I care about her, and I didn't want her to have a total dud of a show, and I was trying to think about if there was anything interesting, and really, there's some point at 48 years old with 2 kids where you would like to think you have some value to somebody out there other than just calling a game, and I don't do a lot for anybody else other than myself, so if there's one kid out there that hears this and says, oh, well, if he has that, I can get through it. Because right now, if there's a kid out there who's got a learning disability and they're trying to get through our school system, I know it sucks. So I guess I would hope that person hears it and knows that it gets better.